tonight's webcast is going to be focusing on serverless 360, and we're going to talk about some of the things I've learned and some of the features of the product I've used over the last 90 days where I've been trying out serverless 360. So just a little bit about me. I'm sure looking at the list of people on the attendees, I think I know most of you guys from the integration summits, and I recognize a lot of the names from things like Integration Monday. But if you haven't come across me before, my name is Mike Stephenson, and I'm an Azure MVP. I've been an MVP for about 10 years now, and I've got a really strong background in the integration space. So I do a lot of talking about, historically things like BizTalk, but much more recently things like cloud, logic apps, functions, that kind of thing. Before we get into the detail of the presentation, I just want to do a quick shout out on a couple of things. So the first ones, we've got Integrate coming up in 2019. So we've got 2 conferences this year, so that's really good growth from last year. So we've got 3rd to the 5th of June in London, and the 24th till the 26th in Redmond, and we've got a sort of discount code so I think there's an early bird offer on at the minute, but I think the discount code will get you an extra 10% off if anyone wants to grab that. So a great little opportunity, and a little thank you for coming and listening to us tonight. Next up, anybody who hasn't seen this really great initiative that's been started recently, Kent and Steve Jan have started something called serverlessnotes.com, and the idea is they've got a kind of a documentation site where they're kind of writing a lot of articles about their learnings about serverless implementations on Azure. So particularly they're looking at things like functions and logic apps, and really good place to go and kind of find out those little things that you don't learn until you get you're in the trenches. So that really good resource coming together for the community there. Quick one about me then. So I'm based in the UK. As I mentioned, that I specialize in cloud architecture, Azure integration, do quite a bit with Dynamics these days, and a bit with the Power Platform. I think most of us have probably come across each other before, as I say, but if you haven't, next time you're at a conference, if you spot me around, feel free to come up and say hi and have a chat. The background for tonight's presentation is that I've worked with 2 customers to implement serverless 360. So the first customer is a global enterprise customer with complex serverless integration scenarios, and unfortunately I can't talk too much about them just because of the slightly sensitive nature of some of this stuff. But the other customer is actually my business that I own, so I can talk as much as I like about that, which is something I like doing. And my own small business is an online retail store which I've developed, and it serves 2 purposes. So one, it's a little bit of a fun side business, but kind of one of the real reasons I've got it is I'm able to build a lot of Azure solutions on the back end using a real business as an example of sort of showcasing the art of the possible with Azure. So some people might have seen me talk about this at events in the last sort of number of months, and we're going to look at some of the demos that I've got in that real world business today. But what we're going to focus on instead is more about how I'm managing them with serverless 360 and what I found out and what I think. And a little bit of the background to this is that Saravana and I, so Saravana, who owns BizTalk 360, we've been friends for as many years as I can remember. And Saravana asked me to sort of have a look at serverless 360 and give them some good feedback and things like that on it. So I've set it up. I've used it in the real world in my small business in addition to my customer, and hopefully I've been able to give them some nudges in the right direction around certain features and stuff. And the idea is just to showcase some of what I've done to help other people who might be getting started out with serverless 360. So the theme for today, rather than just jumping into serverless 360, I want to talk about 3 areas. So I'm going to talk a little bit about cloud serverless architecture to begin with. I'm then going to talk about the democratization of IT support. So I think those are 2 key themes, which I think, number one, people are struggling to get their heads fully around, but they're really important themes that underpin the types of solutions that people build and how they're going to manage them. That'll lead you to want to buy serverless 360. And then the next thing I'm going to talk about is my online retail business, and we're going to look at how I've used it. So we'll cover both those angles. Jumping into the serverless architecture patterns then. So if we think about some a diagram a bit like this one here. So if you look around on places like Twitter, I've been seeing people blogging and posting articles and doing presentations for about maybe the last 6 months to a year, where a lot of diagrams that look very much like this have been starting to emerge. And it's the idea that we've got a number of services on Azure that compose together, and the idea is that they work together to solve a business solution. And the more I was thinking about this, the more I was starting to see this become a really common architecture. And I would argue it's based on the principles of microservices, but it probably isn't quite what you'd class as a microservice architecture maybe. And what I wanted to describe was the idea of what is this thing together inside this box that solves this problem. And I think the guys at Serverless 360 came up with the idea of a composite application when they were building their product. Now that's a term Microsoft have used in the past, and I think it's a really good way of describing this architecture here. So I'm going to call this a composite integration app. And really what it is a box with a group of Azure resources in it that are going to solve a specific problem. So in this case here, we've got something like a Power App that submits messages to an API. They go onto a queue. A Logic app does a bit of stuff, and then there's some functions that integrate with Dynamics. And maybe this is a pattern where you might be loading data from partners into Dynamics or something like that. And I've seen loads of these types of diagram with things like, people have often got cognitive services in there or other bits and pieces of Azure. And I think this is a kind of a modern integration architecture pattern that I think hasn't been fully described properly yet, but I think it's one that we're going to see more and more of over time. And I think it fits really well with the serverless deployment model. So if you're going to be using these type of technologies, I think you're going to start seeing this thing emerge more in your business. Now, the question from that is, if we've got this serverless composite integration app, how do we support it? And if we think about who does what, so if you start with what do Microsoft do, so the idea of using serverless means I've got people who are doing a lot of the work for me. So I'm not doing all the low-level networking, hardware configuration and that. I'm offloading a lot of that in the serverless solution. So here we've got Microsoft, where they've got things like Azure Service Status that are looking at the individual SKUs on Azure. So maybe we've got Logic apps, we've got functions, and they're kind of checking that they're up and running, they're doing a good job, and they're meeting their SLAs. And that's really Microsoft's role in the solution, is to make sure the core platform functions do their job. Now, on top of that, we've got an IT department within an organization where you may have your Azure administrator who's part of your IT ops team. And his job's really to look across the Azure architecture and kind of, again, make sure everything's working as he expects it to be and as he's configured it to. So maybe we use things like Azure Advisor, Monitor, OMS, Security Center, possibly even a bit of App Insights as well. And he's looking at so on the diagram here, we've got just an example of the evolving architecture in a company. And he's looking at these things and saying, are my service buses working? Are my Logic apps working? Are they doing the right job? The key bit he's looking at is he's looking at the capability, not necessarily the business solution. So he's saying, a bit like if you imagine in a more traditional IT scenario, you might have a DBA who would be saying, is my database server up and running, or my database is available? But he doesn't really focus too much on, does the database actually serve the business function it's supposed to? He's really on about the service level of the database itself. So this is where we start thinking about Serverless 360. So the challenge here is, how do I take a number of resources that are in different parts of Azure, in potentially different resource groups that work together to solve a problem, and how do I package them up into a way that the support team can look after these resources and manage to make sure that the business function or the business problem that they solve is being solved effectively and the business solution's working. So this is where a support team can develop what we've called a composite application in Serverless 360, and I can represent the resources. So if we take a look at on the diagram, the order management solution, so I've got a couple of functions that are in different resource groups, logic apps and queues. I've decided that they work together to solve the problem. I've put them in my composite application sort of block in serverless 360, and I can manage them with least privilege at that level, which means I can, reduce the risk of me having to know about all of the rest of the Azure platform. I just need to learn the solution that I'm supporting. So I think that's where the sweet spot for serverless 360 is, in terms of being able to fill that gap, which will allow a support team without significant Azure experience to be able to look after this solution. Next up, we've got the democratization of IT support. So you can see in that discussion there, we're already starting to talk about the background of the democratization of IT support. And really, if you think about some of the themes we've had coming up in integration conferences and integrates and that for the last few years, we've seen the emergence of things like citizen integrator, we've seen citizen developer, we're talking more and more about self-service IT, and democratization of integration. Now, democratization really means it's about making the function available to less experienced, less skilled people. Now, that's a great fit for IT support, because what I tend to argue is that if you look at many organizations, when it comes to support and Azure features, it tends to be your most experienced Azure people that have to look after them, and it's difficult for companies to offload that support to less experienced people, which brings in a massive inefficiency, because we want our highly skilled, highly experienced, expensive people to be focused on the bits that add value, and we want to take things like the support of the solution and give that to cheaper people, less experienced people in the team who can kind of take that grunt work away a little bit. Now, the problem with doing that is typically you have the challenge of the experience, the danger of them actually breaking something up through lack of knowledge or lack of experience of what they're doing. So democratization of IT support is quite a challenging thing for people to do, especially on newer and fast changing technologies. So if we think about a typical support process, just to illustrate this in action, so here we've got, going from left to right, the idea that a business user or a monitoring tool might raise some kind of issue. And then we've got our first and second line support team, where the knowledge required to support the solution is low and the cost of support's low. If he can't solve the problem, it goes to the DevOps team, where the cost's a bit higher, the knowledge of the solution's higher in that team. Hopefully they'll resolve it, but if they can't, it might escalate. And at that point, the development team probably kick in, who originally built the solution. The costs of them fixing an issue are more expensive, and the knowledge of the solution's high. And then finally, if they can't solve it, it might be that it's not really an application, it's an architecture problem. And then you're going to end up with your architecture team also getting involved, and suddenly the costs are going to be really significant, and you might have to make some big changes to the application itself. So in this support model, really, the further to the left we deal with issues, the lower the cost of support. But the challenge is that the further to the left we go, we've got less experience of the solution and more danger of breaking something if we don't know what we're doing. So I think I've actually just talked through this slide when I was talking through the diagram, so we'll just skip that one over. Now, in the real world, what we want to do, as I say, is move things to the left. But if you break down a typical organization, what you might find is something like, let's say, particularly around Azure, and I think that this is probably arguably a case back in the day for BizTalk solutions as well, was that quite a small percentage of the support's actually dealt with by the first and second line teams, and it tends to be more the DevOps or environments team deals with quite a bit of it, and then most of the support tends to end up going to the specialists, the development team or the BizTalk team or the Azure specialists who have that extensive knowledge, because it's been very difficult to offload that support. And so really with serverless 360, we're trying to tackle that problem and be able to allow other people to sort of get involved in this support experience. So coming on to my business then, so I have a business called Nothing But Unicorns, which is a little bit of a fun sort of business. Started off, as I mentioned, it started off as a bit of an idea to teach some kids about how you could do global business from your bedroom, and it also served the dual purpose of letting me build some some cool Azure demos to support the business. But it is a real website. You can actually go onto it today, and you can buy unicorns from it. So that's a good thing. It's also, when I speak at events, if I can use some of the things in this business as an example, it just adds a little bit of fun to what we're talking about as well. So hopefully you guys like this idea. We look at the business itself. So I started with the Shopify platform, and what really got me thinking about the Azure opportunities was I built some of the shop, got up and running really quickly, and I was having some performance problems. And what I did was I was struggling to work out what the problem was, and I managed to use application insights in the shop to help me get some telemetry data so I could troubleshoot the problem. And that was a bit of a game changer for me, because I suddenly thought, well, I knew you could do that with things like Dynamics and stuff, where you just get just the JavaScript website client experience. But the minute I started thinking about that, I thought, well, if I can hook App Insights in, what else can I do with Shopify to make this business quite interesting? And what we're going to do is, as we go through the next slides, we're going to look at some examples of how I built this shop out. With different sort of real world use cases, and we'll look at how you might monitor each of them. So starting off here, we've got the core sort of e-commerce platform, where we've got Shopify at the top, which provides your kind of front end user experience and the online store. In the middle, we've got some stuff for product management and order fulfillment. On the bottom, we've got suppliers who are integrated in, and excuse me, I'm just going to grab a quick drink. So on the bottom, we've got some suppliers who integrate in, and we can offload orders to the suppliers, get products in, and deliver them out. We've got PayPal and Stripe support our payments, and then we've got the marketing and social media platform. Now, what I'm going to focus on mainly is this kind of supply chain scenario. I think the marketing and social media platforms are a load of black magic in its own right that I must admit I'm not really an expert in. But I think from the perspective of the demos, we want to talk about the whole idea of selling online and having a supply chain behind it. I think something everybody will recognize, and probably a lot of people have worked with before, so it gives us some good topics to talk about. Now, what I did was, in addition to the e-commerce platform, I complemented that with what I've called my enterprise application platform, and I've taken a number of resources from Azure and Office 365 to help me. So starting at the bottom, I needed to build some back office applications to support various back office functions. So I've used model-driven Power Apps to be able to do that. In terms of collaboration and communication, so I've used Microsoft Teams quite a bit to demonstrate how the departments could work, and how people as the business grew, how people might work together. We've got some online bot capability in the website. The integration platform behind it's mainly going to be functions, logic apps, data factory, service bus. And then I've got some BI capability with cognitive services, Power BI, and Azure SQL database. So we've got a platform here that, if you imagine, one of the key sweet spots of this is it's a small, medium enterprise spending a very small amount of money on Azure, getting loads of value out of it. But as my business grows, and if I became a full-on unicorn magnate who sold millions of pounds a year of unicorns, this IT setup would just grow with my business, and I would just start spending more to support the bigger volume I'm dealing with. But this architecture is one that can work from the smallest business up to a full enterprise store, which I think, to me, that's one of the real sweet spots on Azure that can make it such a great platform for business today. So looking at some of the demos, then first off, we're going to look at the customer feedback demo. And what I wanted to do here was I wanted to capture feedback from customers who might be using my online store. So I'm just going to jump out of the slides for a moment and jump onto the store itself. So here we've got the online store, and I've got a feedback section here. So in a second you'll see here loads up my feedback form, and I'm going to just fill this in. So yep, I've ordered, and I'm going to give myself really good ratings because I can't, and then but I'm going to give a comment of my order did not get delivered. Now, one of the really interesting things here is I've learned from other businesses that when people fill in these forms, it's quite common that people tick boxes to say quite good things when it's multi-select. So when they get down to the comments bit, often what they say in the comments isn't a good reflection on what they actually ticked in the boxes. So one of the things I wanted to do, I'll just submit that and I'll show you that come through in a moment. If we just jump back to the slides here. So one of the things I wanted to do is I've embedded Cognitio Forms, which is a third-party tool where you get like like a couple of hundred free forms a month, and that data that I save from the form saves into the Cognitio platform. But in my Logic app, there's a bunch of functions for Cognitio Forms, so I can get a notification every time there's a form filled in. I can receive it, and what I can do is, one of the things is I take the text of the free text the user filled in, and I'm going to run it via cognitive services, and that'll allow me to do sentiment analysis of that, and actually get an additional sort of indicator as to if the what do they feel in terms of that free text, in addition to the just yes, no, or multiple choice questions. And then from my Logic app, I'm going to save to SQL Azure so I can do some Power BI reporting and make some strategic decisions. And I'm also going to save to my Power app if I wanted to do any case management around it. Or likewise, I'm going to save to Microsoft Teams. And so we just jump into the demo, and I'll just quickly finish that off. So here we should be able to see in a second there. So my customer service feedback's just lit up over here on my Teams channel. So here's the information that I filled in before, and you can see my sentiment analysis score came back as 0.2 or 0.02, which is really quite bad. So it's between 0 and 1. So that tells me that what I might do here is, if I had loads of people filling the form in, I might only look at the comments of the people who are at the really good and really bottom bad end of that scale. If I was getting lots of comments coming in, it would help me focus my efforts onto the bits that really mattered, rather than the middle ground's probably not worth spending too much time on. But you can see that kind of feeds in there. Here I've got in my team, in the channel for customer service feedback, I've got a quick way of jumping into Cognitio Forms if I want to, and I'm going to skip the Power BI because I'll show you some other Power BI later. But you can see that's really how that bit works. Now, if we go to Serverless 360 next, the question is really, how do we manage and monitor this application? So a couple of things that I think about what I want to monitor here are, firstly, is the Logic app enabled? And secondly, did the Logic app get any errors? Now, that I've deliberately started with this demo because it's a really simple one. I just want to introduce Serverless 360, and there's some good things that I can use to help me do these checks. So if I go over to the Serverless 360 platform here, now you can see I've got a bunch of composite applications here, and what I'm going to just quickly demonstrate is if I go into Azure, if I look at the Azure platform resource groups, I've got quite a lot of resource groups with stuff in. Obviously, there's more demos in here that I'm going to show today. And what I've kind of got is, if you imagine a horizontal and vertical pattern where the resource groups called apps have some stuff that just solve that business problem, a bit like what I'm saying the composite application does. But I've also got ones called platforms. So these are reusable services like the cognitive services instance, the service bus messaging. They'll be in these platform areas because I'll have multiple solutions that would use them. And the idea is that it wouldn't be cost effective to have many instances of some of these services if I had one per app. So I want to have a degree of reuse to minimize my management overhead and also my cost. But up here, what I can do is in my composite application, I can just define a composite app and bring things in from different resource scripts. So my web customer feedback, as I said, was quite a simple one where I've just got this this logic app, and I can go in and I've got a little bit of capability here to see when it's ran, and I can see some of the history and some of the things that happened. Just have to move this menu bar a minute. And what I wanted to be able to do, so as I say, with this one being quite simple, I don't have all the other resources that I might have in some of the others that I'll show in a minute. I don't have anything I need to automate at this point, but I do have something to monitor. So I've set up a couple of monitors here, and the first one is my status monitor. And what I'm able to do is set up the status monitor so that on my logic app, I'm just checking it's been enabled, and I'll get a report once a day to tell me if it's healthy or not, or I can configure that report to run multiple times a day if I want to. But that just makes sure everything's turned on and is in the state that we expect it to be. The next report is a watch report. So here I'll get notified pretty promptly if there's any errors. And with this, I can associate things like logic apps, functions, endpoints if I want to. And basically, if that logic app fails at any point, then I'll get a notification to tell me something's not going right. And what I've tended to configure is so some of the notifications, I'm logging them to Teams, and I'm also logging them via email as well. And that's pretty much it for the really simple ones. It's just a quick introduction showing how I can kind of configure the logic app to be monitored, looked after, and now I'm able to just leave it knowing that I can trust Serverless 360 to tell me if there's any problems, and I don't need to keep babysitting it all the time. Next up, we're going to look at a pattern I've called Shopify webhooks. So here we've got information that the Shopify store can publish out and tell me about what's going on in my shop. So you can see here what you can define as a webhook handler that I'll show you in a minute. And that'll send out messages to these webhook handlers, which I've basically built with Azure Functions. And what I wanted to do was to start off by just putting the messages onto Service Bus. And when I first started the demo, I just left it at that and thought, right, it's on Service Bus. When I get some ideas what to do with it, then I'll come back and build some cool stuff. So eventually I had this idea about, right, I'll take some of these events, I'll take some of them to Power Apps, and I can manage background processes, and I can build up things like product portfolios and things like that. And I'll also take some of them up to SQL Azure, and I'll be able to do some analysis with Power BI to be able to see see what things like how my products are going and that kind of thing. And if I just quickly show you guys that one now. So with if we start off with Shopify, so down in my Shopify settings, I've got this thing called notifications. So down at the bottom here where I've got the webhooks one, the really great thing is I can specify all of these different events here, and I can kind of just say, right, if a refund's created, send some JSON to this URL. And you can see that the good thing with Shopify is the number of different events there are gives me a really rich way of being able to build some good stuff. So one of the things I started with was things like if somebody adds something to a shopping cart, tell me about it, and then I can get an idea of what people are doing online, which products they're looking at and stuff like that. Then over at Azure, I created my Shopify webhooks one over here, and I had a set of functions that basically receive the messages, drops the messages onto a topic. So over in Service Bus Explorer, you can see I've got some of the topics set up here, and so what I did was I basically put each different message goes on a topic, and I can just grab it as I need to later on. And then we've got things like the Power App and the Power BI stuff. So one of the examples I'll show you in Teams was down here I've got shopping carts. So here I get a notification on Teams every time somebody adds something to a shopping cart or removes it and that kind of thing. And it just lets me see in sort of near real time what kind of things are going on the shop and what people are looking at. And I can get an idea with a bit of Power BI stuff. So here's one of the things. So this tells you how much money worth of stuff people have put into the shopping cart on the store. Now, if you work in online retail, one of the things you would learn is that the real secret to success is being able to maximize the number of people who put shopping products into carts and then actually sells them, convert it to a sale. You get a lot of people who put stuff in a shopping cart but then never buy it. So that let me start exploring how to tackle that problem, which maybe something I can go into another time. But for today, I really just wanted to show that capturing that data into Power BI via the SQL database starts giving me reports about most common products, and how much value it is. And one of the cool things I did as well, which you can't really, I'm not going to go into the technical detail of today, but using the data from what people were putting into shopping carts, I've built a logic app that basically every night it goes and looks at this most popular products on the website, and it uses the data from customers to determine which products are the best products to show as the ones that people are most interested in. So it's like customer driven feedback on which are my most popular products. Now, if we come to the monitoring of this solution, so there's a couple of things going on here. So I've got topics, I've got functions in this particular one, and what I want to do is basically say, are my functions healthy? Are they getting any errors? Are the queues and topics all healthy and stuff? So in Serverless 360, again, I've got a composite app for this, so this forms a nice little kind of bit to manage the Shopify stuff. Now, what's quite interesting here is I've actually got, if I remember right, I've got two. I think is it this one? Yeah. So where are we? So let's take the queues, for example, right? So if you imagine in our IT team, as our business grows, there's two different people might be looking at this solution. So the people who care about the online store events coming into the IT architecture might be looking at this solution of Shopify webhooks, but you might also have your IT admins care about your service bus queues. So I can actually have the same resource, a queue, registered in two different composite apps. And what I might do is I might say I'm the guy who's responsible for service bus, and I might set up all my queues and topics in here, and I might have rules around monitoring that, make sure they're all healthy and stuff like that. And I can say my service bus is working. So it's a bit like going back to the SQL admin a while ago. You can look at it from an IT perspective and go, yep, our service is running. But I can also look at it from a business solution perspective, where I can go in here, and here I've registered all the storage that goes with my my functions. I've got all the topics here that I'm pushing messages onto to make sure they're available, and I can go into things like my functions. I can see they're running, and I can go in and see a bit more detail about each of them when they load up. So just let that load up in the background. So you can see I've got all my individual functions here. They're all running nice and healthy. And what I'm able to do again with the monitors, so I can use the status monitor where I can go in and I can configure it, and I can say things like, twice a day I want you to tell me a health check of everything in this composite application. So I might define my rules for what means they're healthy here. So you can see that at the moment everything's currently healthy, but I might take my topic and I can edit it, and I can say, that this is what indicates that it's healthy. So I might change the status here, for example, and then in my status monitor, I might configure it to go, I want it to run at 8 o'clock, but I might also want you to run at 4 o'clock. And one of the things I've got here is, you can see I've got it right now to Teams to say what's going on, but I'm also emailing it as well. So if we have a quick look on the Shopify webhooks and the Teams here, you can see I've got the status report just telling me what's going on. So I think from my perspective, I really like this integration with Teams, because it means I can just, what I've done here is I've created a different channel for each of the composite apps, and it means it's really easy to go and manage these apps on their own right and see that they're looking good and stuff. So I'll just update that, and then I've got all the other monitors as well. So if I can do things like maybe a threshold monitor, I might say if this function starts getting errors, and it gets more than say 10 errors, I might start throwing out some alerts and things like that. Next up, we're gonna look at what's one of my favorite demos in here. So we've done a really simple one. We made it a little bit more complex when we looked at the webhooks. The shipping data is a little bit more complicated again. So in this one, we've got, if you imagine, if you make an order, you'll get an email with a tracking number once the order gets dispatched. So on my website, I've got a little utility. So we go up here, and you're able to track an order by popping a tracking number in. So you can go 1, 2, 3, and you can go, and it'll use a third-party implementation to track that order for you. And obviously, I've just made a number up, so it doesn't exist there. Now, what I can do is, my from the business perspective, I think my biggest lesson is that the delivery side of it is really the hardest part of the business, because once I ship a product, the entire thing's out of my control, and I've handed it over to a delivery company. And if they do their job well, my customer gets the product quite quickly, and they're very happy. And if they don't do their job, then it reflects badly on me, and I've got to manage a customer who may be unhappy, but I actually might be quite frustrated. I might have done a really great job, but then the post company might have lost it, and that's real painful from my side. So what I wanted to do was so I use this third-party thing called Aftership, which integrates on the website and it lets the customer see the order and where it is. But with Aftership, I also get webhooks like I do with Shopify. So here I've got at the top, we've got companies like UPS and Royal Mail and USPS and stuff. They send info to Aftership about parcels as they go through the process. And with Aftership, I get my webhooks and I'm able to handle it with a Logic app, and then I publish it to Service Bus and I do different things with it. So one of them that I do that's really interesting is I use a Logic app to load it into the SQL Azure database, and I can do some analysis on the delivery process and how things are going. And I also, after I did that, I sort of started building a bit of a back office capability. So I've got the Power Apps involved and I've got Teams involved. So Teams just has a bit of a chat telling me about what's happening as status updates happen. But in the Power App, I'm able to sort of manage customers that I think might have a problem. So what I wanted to do was go, right, if a customer's delivery meets a certain set of criteria, I think the customer might get in touch to say they haven't received their order yet, what's going on. And I wanted to, rather than just be reactive to that, I wanted to preempt that contact, see it, have it in my Power App, work out what's going on, and be able to answer the question before the customer gets in touch, kind of thing. So this is what I ended up with, and I'll just quickly show you guys the Power App as well. So over here, sorry, let me jump into this. I've got a model-driven Power App, which, if anyone's not familiar with, Power Apps now have two forms. So we've got Canvas apps, which are mobile and tablet, and model-driven apps are built on top of the Dynamics platform. So here I've got a list of orders that have been looked at over the while. Excuse me. And in this order here, what I might do is when it goes into the Power App, I can just manage it from a queue. I can get the tracking number. I know the order number. I know what the status is. And once it goes into this queue, I've got a Logic app that'll go just getting status updates for this every night, just checking if there's anything that, for some reason I lost a message that didn't update it. So I can go and kind of check for this. Now, what I would normally do is I just check what's going on. It might be that it's just part way through getting delivered and just needs to wait a bit longer. But you also get scenarios where sometimes a shipping company might just not have sent out the telemetry data about the shipping and things like that. So this gives me an opportunity to kind of manage those and work out what's going on and just give great customer service. Really is the key thing with this. And actually, what's quite cool as well with this, I'll just show everyone, is in my delivery and shipping. So here's the updates of each of the tracking numbers, saying what the expected deliveries are and stuff. But with Power BI, once I get this really cool data, and the key thing for a business these days is what data have you got, and what intelligence can you ascertain from it. So here I was able to work out with some of the data about deliveries and building up knowledge about how long things take to get delivered. Now I'm delivering orders all over the world, but I can work out that my average delivery takes 13 days. I can work out delivery by country. I can work out exceptions. So you can see, most of my orders tend to get delivered within about, say, 5 to 12 days, give or take. And then you do get a few exceptions that skew the figures a bit, but it gives me a really good idea about how things are going on. But then the Power App, one of the examples where the Power App really kicked in was I had, if anyone's in Canada, you might know of the the Canadian Post strikes. So in early December, I had a load of problems where sending orders to Canada, and then they would arrive in Canada, and then the post service there was on strike, so everything was just queuing up at the airports, and it was causing chaos for everybody. So having that back office Power App was really useful for managing customers around that. So we have a think about what we want to monitor here. So we've got a few things. So number one, I've got the service bus, the queues and topics around the Power App integration. I've got some logic apps, so I need to be notified if there's any errors. I need to be aware of the state of everything and make sure it's all running effectively. And over in Serverless 360, so I've got a composite app for a couple of these things. So first off, again, from the platform perspective, I got a couple of ones here. So firstly, I've got my data warehouse integration, so anything going to the SQL Azure. I've got my my logic apps and my functions and stuff that get stuff from queues into the data warehouse. I've also got this this Aftership app up here, which actually, just before I show you that one, I'll show you. I've also got the customer service one. So here, from a platform perspective, I guess this is managing the everything going into the Power App. So I can see, if there was problems with the Power App, I might see it across a couple of solutions. But specifically for the Aftership stuff, I've got a couple of topics here, a couple of logic apps, and you can see I've got a queue, and there's a bit of a problem with that queue. If you notice, there's a little yellow flag next to it. So what I might do is, if I go and have a look at my queue here, and I can see there's a couple of dead letter messages on that queue. So with Serverless 360, you can see I've got some features here to be able to manage and do stuff with dead letter queues. And what I could maybe do is I could choose to pull those messages off the dead letter queue. Maybe I'd fix them and resubmit them, or maybe I just submit them straight back. But with Serverless 360, I've also got the ability to do some activities. So I can go and create an activity over here. So one example would be a dead letter activity, and I might choose to automatically submit messages that hit the dead letter queue. I might automatically send them to be tried again, and I can kind of do some partial automation of that process, which can, it's all about making my app lowering the requirements for supporting it, and things like this. The big one here is if you think of like least privilege. So I've got a whole bunch of composite apps doing different things, and I might have different support teams in my business look after each one. So here with these dead letter messages, I can go and allow somebody to resubmit these dead letter messages without worrying about them caring about other things on Service Bus that aren't to do with this composite app, which I think is quite an important use case, that idea of least privilege. And if anyone's not already aware, there's also a governance angle, so I would know who resubmitted stuff, and I can see when it was done, which I think is quite important. So just touching on the monitoring again. So again, like before, we've got status monitor here. It gives us details about once a day or multiple times a day if you configure it. Here's a health check. We've got the watch that tells me if anything, so one of them functions stops working on one of the logic apps, if it gets an error, it'll alert out to me. I've also got this thing called a data monitor. So if anyone's familiar with BizTalk 360, you might remember the data monitors. And what I'm able to do is configure these logic apps to say things like, have this daily refresh that should run once a day. So I'm trying to configure that to say, I should have one successful run of that every day. And I think I've probably got my alert configured wrong yesterday, so I'm hoping tonight I've fixed that, and you'll see this starts going going green. Sorry, but yesterday the alert wasn't quite configured right, so I've been getting amber for a couple of days. But that's a really good way of kind of checking, things like, if I get like 10 function executions a day, or at least 10, or I should have at least 3 messages received. It gives you a good idea that the data's going through your system as well as just the system's healthy. So jumping back to the slides now, so what have I learned then on this journey? So I think we've got about a bit more than 10 minutes left, so I think that's a good point to start thinking about bringing everything together. So my first learning with Serverless 360 was that I was really rubbish at building stuff when I thought I was quite good at it. So I was quite pleased with these demos, thought they were really going quite nicely. I set Serverless 360 up, and I'm just going to show you a bit of my inbox here. So I had everything just being dumped to a folder, and what I noticed was that I think in one day I had 300 emails, and I'm thinking, right, okay, so I'm getting a lot of errors here. This has been running, and I demoed this at some conferences and stuff a few times, and I just never realized how many errors I was getting. And that's actually, that's quite telling. And if I had that in a POC, it's not unrealistic to think that companies could be getting errors without really realizing. And what I found was that there's a couple of things here. So first off, I was getting a lot of errors in my functions where the JSON that I was getting in wasn't quite what I thought it was, and I just hadn't picked up they were getting errors. The other things were some stuff around tuning the alerts. As you can see, I've just had a couple of threshold violations there. But also I spent a bit of time tuning the alerts to make sure a couple of them I'd configured to run too frequently. So I was doing a status report every 15 minutes instead of once a day, which is where I wanted it. But I think spending a little bit of time going through your alerts to get them right was really key. The next thing was the composite application. I think is the real big win in Serverless 360. So it makes it significantly simpler to manage a business solution. And now that I've got lots of demos here, it kind of really helps me work out which bit does what, because on the Azure platform, I know I've got resource groups, but things are still split across multiple resource groups, and it's difficult to keep your head around exactly what does work together or not. So I think the composite app view is really significant, and I think some of the plans at Serverless 360 around doing more with that are going to really extend that and make it even better. I think hopefully you got a flavor from the way I've combined Serverless 360 and Teams. I think that's a good pattern to follow as well, because it's almost like it gives your application a voice, and I can start seeing things that's going on, and it stops it feeling like a black box, which I think is very important for people who aren't experts in that application, but support people, business people, whatever. They can come in, they can see that it's working and doing things and what's going on with it. A few little tips. So I found that I started off with one channel in Teams, and it just ended up having quite a lot of stuff in it. So I think the one channel per composite application works really well, and that also means you can potentially just have a team channel just for that app, and you can have documentation with it. You can have some Power BI stuff with it and all that kind of thing, which I think works. I mentioned that you can register a resource with more than one composite app, so I think that's a big win. If you're doing like multiple different teams that are using Serverless 360, so you can have your support team and your IT ops team they can do they can be looking at these things from different angles, and they can create their own composite apps that would look at different parts of the solution and give you different views on it. And then I think the key one after that is the tuning of your alerts. So I think I've had a chat with Aaron about some ideas that I think would make the alerts kind of automate some of the setup for customers. But I think the best thing to do is set everything up and then turn bits off till you get it just right. And I think by doing that, what I found was there was a lot of stuff I didn't know about my solution that was going on, and it just really helped improve the quality. And then when I got to the right level, everything's kind of running quite nicely now.